Hey guys, welcome back. I hope you're having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is a pro-revenge story. This time last year, our tech company went through some serious downsizing, laying off people left and right while piling more work on those of us who remained, and not even giving us a decent raise. We're a small outfit with under 200 employees, trying to hang on to our government contracts while the big dogs like Amazon Cloud are circling to replace us in the next decade or so. The government folks love working with us because we're specialists who treat them better than the big impersonal contractors who don't give them the time of day. They axed 30 people from my team of 50. So now 20 of us are doing the work that used to be split between 50, and we're not seeing a penny more for it. We get paid a flat rate per month, no overtime, no sales commissions. That'll be important later. I've always been a stickler about reviewing every single contract, no matter how small, putting in long hours to make sure we cross every T and dot every I. The government procurement process is glacial and they're paranoid about risk, so a lot of clients start tiny with a modest 4 or 5 figure deal. If all goes well, that can blossom into an 8 or even 9 figure contract down the road. With the skeleton crew, I was struggling to keep up and contracts were piling up fast. The sales director, in a different department than me, had it in for me because I was slow and always caught them trying to pull a fast one by overpromising or doing something shady. The government clients loved me because I'd level with them about our capabilities and limitations instead of just telling them what they wanted to hear. But the sales guy hated that I was supposedly tanking deals. Of course, most of my clients stuck with us for decades. For example, sales was trying to dump a bunch of outdated Dell Windows laptops on this school district, while the whole state was switching to cheaper Chromebooks. Schools are strapped for cash, and whatever computers they buy, they're stuck with for 5+ years minimum. On top of overcharging for the obsolete laptops, sales quoted these poor schmucks almost $1 million for IT support to deal with the inevitable hardware failures down the line. When I spoke to the district, I gave them some examples of northeastern states saving money by going with Chromebooks instead, future-proofing their tech investment at a fraction of the cost. My job is to get them the best value, so they'll stick with us for 5 or 10-year deals. The district ended up getting Chromebooks for 40% less than the laptop quote, with IT support that was under 20% of what sales tried to bill them initially. Sure, it cost those vultures a few grand in personal commissions, but we locked in a half-decade contract with the client. The sales director went ballistic when he found out I was spending too much time vetting these smaller deals instead of rubber stamping them. He tore a strip off me in front of our boss, who didn't have my back at all. The boss just asked me, "Why don't you stop nitpicking the little stuff and do what the sales guy wants?" I tried explaining that a lot of these small contracts could turn into big ones down the road, so I needed to get them right from the start. Mistakes that seem tiny at first can snowball into massive liabilities if we get sloppy. Plus, with them dumping 3 or 4 people's workloads on me, I was swamped. That just set the director off again, yelling about how I didn't know anything about contracts after his 5 years of experience. He bragged about making more money per month than I did all year, so I should just shut up and listen to him instead of questioning things. It stung to get that arrogant crap from a guy who drives a luxury sports car and blows hundreds on long boozy lunches with government employees using his ill-gotten commission money, while I'm sharing a cheap apartment and having to pinch pennies. I asked the sales jerk to put his suggestions for improving my work in an email. He fired one off like a petulant brat with a snarky, "Can't you even remember what I said in the meeting?" His brilliant advice was for me to stop reviewing any contracts under 100K, trusting that sales had done their due diligence already. I promptly replied, copying my boss, that skipping contract reviews under 6 figures could expose us to major liability down the line. I wanted him to confirm, in writing, that sales would be 100% responsible for financial, legal, and regulatory compliance on those smaller government jobs from now on. No exceptions unless he countermanded that order. That smug piece of work took the bait, hook, line, and sinker. Enter malicious compliance. Instead of spending 2 hours scrutinizing every minor contract, I gave them all a 10-minute skim job. Like magic, my backlog disappeared and I was out the door by 6:30 p.m. When a 10K deal came across my desk, I noticed it included an old 30% rebate clause for our software vendors that we'd scrapped 5 years earlier in favor of 5-10% rebates. But I also knew this particular government client had just secured a huge budget increase and was going on a spending binge. Keeping track of that stuff is literally my job. There was a high probability they'd leverage this dinky little 10K starter deal into a $100 million monstrosity down the road, with that outdated 30% rebate adding $30 million to our costs. But then I remembered what the exalted sales director said about not fussing over small contracts. So 10 minutes later, I emailed over the obligatory "no issues detected" compliant with sales team's due diligence. Since this was peanuts at 10K, nobody raised any red flags about that crazy rebate clause. 10 months later, the state government wanted to expand our business relationship with at least the same favorable terms for a new $50 million mega contract, the biggest our company had ever seen. The sales director was only too happy to shake on a same or better deal for that client, secure in the assumption that our existing deal terms would just carry over. I mean, what could possibly go wrong? With such a massive contract, every department from legal to IT to finance had to get involved, taking 3 full months to rev up this juggernaut. The sales weasels were practically doing backflips, drooling over the 7-figure commissions they were about to collect. Of course, I wasn't getting a cut since my job is to protect the company's interests, not just make myself richer. When finance finally finished their assessment, they turned white as ghosts. Upholding that 30% rebate clause would cost us $8 million, erasing any profit on the deal. Everyone started frantically searching for the person responsible for approving such a catastrophic money pit. We'd legally committed to those same terms for 3 years, no takesies backsies. Legal said we were stuck taking a huge hit. The CEO called an emergency meeting with all the heavy hitters involved, determined to find a scapegoat. The sales director had to face his own team and explain why their massive bonuses had gone up in smoke after 3 months of thankless labor. When legal and finance revealed it was that harebrained 30% rebate that torpedoed the entire contract's profitability, the sales guy went into an incoherent rage, blaming me in front of everyone and ordering me to grab a box for my desk belongings. That's when I turned to face the whole captive audience, connected my laptop to the display cable, and threw his incriminating email up on the big projector screens for everyone to read. There it was in black and white. The sales guy expressly forbidding me from reviewing deals under 100K and promising his team had properly vetted them already. While the whole room collectively smirked at the email, the director flailed around wildly, calling me a horrible employee who'd misunderstood his instructions. I calmly scrolled down to his reply, blowing off my warning about potential crippling liabilities for the company. The smug bastard turned beet red, reduced to sputtering incoherently while flinging around desperate accusations and racist insults at our overseas IT consultants. He totally lost his mind in front of everyone. Utterly humiliated. The aftermath. After that, I got explicit instructions to spend 2-3 hours carefully scrutinizing every last contract again, no exceptions. The company recognized it was cheaper to hire 20 diligent staffers like me at $70K per year than to let the sales scumbags saddle us with colossal losses through sheer greed. My team grew to 40 people, still not the original 50, but enough to handle the contract load properly. As for Mr. Mastermind Sales Director, the company exercised a bonus clawback clause forcing him to repay his entire previous year's commissions, a cool $300K, for the debacle he'd caused. He got canned shortly after that. Present day. The disgraced dirtbag actually sued for wrongful termination, but just recently lost that case too. On top of the $300K clawback, he now owes the company an additional $200K in legal fees for that frivolous lawsuit. Over $500,000 down the drain for that scumbag, all because he was too arrogant to listen. Update 1. A lot of folks wonder why I stick with this low-paying gig instead of making more elsewhere. Here's the thing. My role is to help government agencies get a fair deal from all the tech vendors, not get fleeced by any one predatory megacorp. It gives me satisfaction to save taxpayer dollars and steer clients toward the best solutions, not just whatever makes my bosses richer. During those first scary COVID lockdowns, government budgets froze up while they scrambled to continue basic operations remotely via Zoom and such. With money tied up everywhere, sales sharks were circling these captive clients, trying to extort whatever they could by forcing new expensive contracts for home hardware and software. I went to the CEO and persuaded him to offer a 60-day free trial program to get agencies up and running quickly, only charging basic setup and delivery fees to cover our costs. It was risky, but we brought in an insurance provider as a safeguard. I sold the CEO on the idea that this was our chance to be a true partner with government in a crisis instead of exploiting them further. The sales vultures grumbled for a few weeks, but then realized all these new clients were re-upping with paid contracts because we'd treated them so well, choosing us over much larger firms that routinely bribed officials with fancy steak dinners and tickets to sporting events. While I can't name names, let's just say some major government bodies in places like New York and Florida took advantage of that trial program early in the pandemic. It built a lot of valuable goodwill. Despite all the extra revenue we've pulled in thanks to me pushing that ethical move, the company's still nickel and diming us with crap 3% annual raises that don't even keep up with inflation. I've got some decent job prospects lined up to explore once I've recharged a bit. Update 2. Here's one more story showing why sales can't stand me. We had a telecom contract with a state government that ballooned during COVID due to employees working remotely. A group Zoom call got scheduled to discuss hiking the state's monthly rate from $60K up to a ludicrous $300K. I pushed back, saying the increase in call volume wasn't nearly enough to justify a 500% price gouge. A $100K monthly rate seemed more reasonable to me, covering our extra costs with a healthy profit margin on top. The Neanderthal sales cranks just laughed me off, saying if the client was dumb enough to pay $300K, who was I to object? The bosses backed the revenue humpers and told me to shut my mouth. While they finalized that sketchy contract, I muted myself and minimized the Zoom window to work on other tasks, assuming the call would end soon. After everyone said their goodbyes, I vented out loud about those greedy wolves trying to take advantage while the whole country was suffering through the pandemic. A coworker messaged me a few minutes later. Turns out I hadn't actually disconnected from the Zoom session, and my crude insult got broadcast to everyone right as the call ended. Nobody confronted me directly, but it really rubbed the sleazeballs the wrong way. Look, most of the newer sales hires aren't so unethical. They're younger folks eager to actually provide value, not just push overpriced junk. But any contract over a certain size automatically gets handled by the old guard jackals in sales leadership. The same corrupt vultures from my first horror story here. Some things never change. The next one is an entitled people story. I've lived in my house for over 20 years now. It's nothing too fancy, just a nice little 2-story home on a quarter-acre lot out in the suburbs. The neighborhood has always been pretty quiet and drama-free, which is exactly what I was looking for when I bought the place. That all changed a few years back when the people next door sold their house. The new owner who moved in was this brash, loudmouthed guy named Chad. I could tell right away he was going to be trouble. The first week he was there, he came knocking on my door to introduce himself. When I answered, he barged right in like he owned the place and started telling me all these big plans he had. He was going to renovate his house, redo the landscaping, build a big new fence on the property line. I tried to politely nod along, but this guy just wouldn't shut up. After what felt like hours of listening to him ramble, he finally left. I figured that would be the end of it, just an annoying first meeting. Oh, how wrong I was. The very next day, I heard the deafening sounds of construction starting next door. Chad had hired a crew and they were there tearing up the yard at 8 a.m. on a Saturday. So much for my peaceful weekend mornings. Over the next few months, the noise never stopped. The banging, drilling, and beeping from the construction equipment was endless. And forget about trying to enjoy my backyard. With the new big privacy fence Chad installed, my view was completely ruined. I tried to reason with Chad about the disruption from the renovation, but he refused to show any consideration for me or the other neighbors. He yelled about how it's his property and he'll do what he wants. My polite requests clearly meant nothing to him. Once the renovations were finally finished, I thought maybe things would get better. Man, was I wrong again. After living there a few more months, Chad's horribly obnoxious personality really began shining through. He was always getting into loud arguments with his wife that the whole block could hear. He blasted music from his garage late into the night, and whenever I'd see him outside, he'd make snide comments about my landscaping or my car or whatever else he wanted to complain about that day. The guy was just an all-around jerk. Fed up with Chad's awful behavior, I decided to build a privacy fence of my own. I carefully reviewed the plat survey to make sure I erected it right on my property line, not an inch over on Chad's side. I just wanted to block this guy out of my life as much as possible. Chad immediately lost it when he saw the fence going up. He came storming over, red-faced, screaming at me that I was encroaching onto his precious property. I calmly explained that I had every right to build a fence on my own land, but he refused to listen, just kept shouting and making threats. Eventually, he stomped back to his house, but I could hear him cursing me out even from inside my home. This man was completely deranged. I knew right then this situation wasn't going to improve unless I stood my ground. Just as I expected, a few weeks later, a process server showed up at my door, slapping me with a lawsuit from Chad. He was suing me for trespassing and property damage from my apparently encroaching fence. I was fuming reading his claims in that paperwork. This lunatic genuinely believed my new fence extended over onto his land. He was clearly just looking for any excuse to harass me and drag me into court. But I wasn't about to cave in to Chad's bullying and intimidation tactics. I immediately called my lawyer and had him prepare my defense. I provided him with a copy of the survey proving the fence sits squarely on my property. I also gave him photos chronicling Chad's erratic, threatening behavior toward me. With my lawyer by my side, I showed up to court on the hearing date fully prepared and confident. Chad strutted in with a conceited sparkle in his eye, clearly expecting me to crumble and back down. Boy, did I love wiping that smug look off his face. As soon as Chad presented his fabricated evidence and wild accusations to the judge, my lawyer calmly rebutted with the land survey and corroborating photos. I also gave my testimony detailing Chad's harassment campaign against me. Watching Chad shrink in his seat as I spoke was so deeply satisfying. Here was this pathetic, petty little man who thought he could bully and intimidate me into submission. But I didn't cower in front of his deceitful allegations. I stood tall with the truth on my side. The judge saw right through Chad's tissue-thin case and lies. He swiftly dismissed the lawsuit and sternly warned Chad against any further frivolous legal action. The defeated look on Chad's face as the gavel slammed down was priceless. Chad tried to get in my face with more threats as we left the courtroom, but my lawyer shut him down real quick. With no case left and no credibility, he had absolutely no leverage over me anymore. It's been few months since that victorious day in court. Chad remains as much of an obnoxious pest as ever, but I hold my head high knowing I beat him at his own game. My fence still stands proudly right where it belongs. This experience has taught me that I shouldn't be intimidated by bullies like Chad. As long as I stand my ground with the facts and law on my side, justice will prevail in the end. Chad's desperate lawsuit was dismissed, and now it's him who has to deal with the consequences of his childish behavior. The next one is a petty revenge story. When I, then 19M, was home for the summer from college, my sister, then 17F, was reveling in being the only child in the house. My sister is the baby of the family and likes it. We generally get along, but she could occasionally be a spoiled brat. I am the opposite of my sister. For most of my childhood, I was a bit of a doormat, classic middle child, very well behaved and under the radar. I didn't fight back much, did as I was told, and generally behaved. The biggest shakeup I brought to the family was when I came out as gay at 17. No one was really bothered by it, and my family is generally pretty supportive. Still, it was a difficult thing to process, and I am glad I got to the point I have today. This is relevant to the story. Now, at the time, I was a much better and more responsible driver than my sister, and as a condition for staying at home for the summer rent-free, my parents would occasionally ask me to drive my sister to and from places they didn't want her driving, usually longer distances or on the highway. For the most part, I did not mind. I love my sister, and we generally get along very well. But like I said, she can occasionally be a real brat and has trouble when things don't go her way. One night, my sister had gotten tickets to attend concert with a boy she liked. As my aunt and uncle were in town and my parents wanted to spend the afternoon having a few glasses of wine out on the patio, they asked if I would be okay driving my sister to the concert that evening. I accepted and figured that was that. My sister and cousins decided they wanted to look at some new outfits and asked me to drive with them to the mall. Being the good brother cousin I was, I piled them into my car and took them to the mall. All was well until my sister decided I was getting on her nerves over something and we got into an argument. Wasn't a big deal until my sister, visibly annoyed, rolled her eyes and said, "You don't have the be such a faggot about it." I saw red. I had been called this word before and have been able to shrug it off, but from my own family, I was not going to take it. I could have yelled, argued more, or even stooped to her level, but it suddenly came over me what I was going to do. It was simple. I was not going to drive her to the concert. I told her as much, and she smirked to tell me, yeah, right, like mom and dad are going to be okay with that. Now when we got home, I went to my parents, explained what happened, and let them know I would not be driving her to the concert. To my complete lack of surprise, they took her side and explained to me they understood I was upset, but I would still need to take her to the concert. My sister's smug look was all I needed. No, was all I said. My parents seemed confused and then explained that that was not an option. I simply said, "You cannot make me. I do not care what you do. I will not drive her." Years of resentment over having to be the good sibling finally spilled out, and I simply said no. My parents, a few glasses of wine deep, tried everything. They threatened to ground me, yelled at me, threatened to take my things, got in my face, and I held my ground. I told them I would take any punishment they wanted, but no one could force me to drive her. At one point, I even looked my father in the eye and said, "Tell me it's okay for her to call me a faggot. Tell me it's okay for anyone to do that." And my parents didn't know what to do. They were too drunk to drive, and it was too late to ask anyone else. My sister refused to apologize, but as we got closer to the time we had to leave, I could tell she was starting to panic. The rage on her face was building up, and it was the sweetest revenge I could ask for. For once, she wasn't going to get her way, and there was nothing she could do about it. Nothing would make me do it. This was the hill I would die on. My sister ended up missing more than half of the show and cried the whole night. It's what she deserved. As for me, my parents never even ended up punishing me. Maybe they were too stunned to do anything or more likely saw that I was right. But from that point on, I had no problem setting boundaries as needed. I could be kind, but I wasn't going to be my family's doormat. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll see you again tomorrow.